G'day, I'm Harry and welcome to my shed. If you've been here before, you know I'm a bit of a yutz, but I do the best I can with the little bit I got. And this time around, we're going to be changing over the injector pump on my TD42 Nissan Patrol. It's a bit of a pain in the butt of a job, and because I'm doing this in the vehicle, there's a lot of stuff that has to go on beforehand. I don't know if you can see from there, I've pulled the radiator, the air conditioning condenser, the fan. There's all sorts of stuff that's the power steering pump's been moved over and out of the way. This is something that's so much easier to do if you've got your engine out of the vehicle. But because I've already gone to the trouble of pulling the old engine out and putting this one in, I wasn't prepared to pull it out. So I'm just going to persevere with what I've got. So I'm not going to spend too much time flapping my gums here. I want to get into it. And yeah, basically just show you the process of what you do, because you have to time the pump up. It's pretty critical that you get that right, and there's a process for that and a special tool, which I'll show you, because then after that I'm going to be replacing the head gasket on this thing, and then hopefully she's drivable. Oakley dokley, we've degreased it. You would have noticed I put some plastic bags over the intake to make sure I didn't get any degreaser or water down the intakes, because you don't want that stuff getting into your engine. I've moved it into its work spot, so from here on out we will render the vehicle undrivable. So make sure that you got yourself organised. If you've got to leave it for a couple of days or whatever, you don't want it sitting in the middle of your driveway and make it difficult to get anything else in or out. Yeah, so we've still got to pull the battery off, remove the fuel lines to the pump, before we could even get the pump itself off, and then we could actually get started on putting the new one in. So you're probably asking yourself, why have I taken the rocker cover off when all I'm doing is putting in a new injector pump? Well, it's rather critical that we make sure we're putting this pump in and timing it when we're at top dead center of the compression stroke. Of the compression stroke. So I've taken the rocker cover off so I can check to make sure I've got a little bit of play in both the inlet and the outlet valves there, or on the rocker covers. I can actually move them, because you need to remember that it actually takes 2 revolutions of the crankshaft to turn the camshaft over once. So the timing's all done based on top dead center of the compression stroke, and there's actually a mark on the harmonic balancer and on the engine, which I've actually marked with a paint marker to make it easy for myself to see. And you're also going to find there's a small Z stamped into the gear that runs off the crankshaft that runs the pump. So it's critical that you get those in the right place, because once we put the pump on, it's then going to be critical that we get the Zs that are on the gear that drives the pump itself to line up and mate in at the right tooth. Otherwise your timing is always going to be out. This is the new pump itself, bought from a reputable supplier. It's rated at 200 horsepower. It's an 11mm pump with boost compensator. If I can get near 200 horsepower and a whole bunch of kilowatts, I'll be really happy. My main concern is reliability, however. The big thing with this pump is that it has come with timing specs. So it's to be timed between 0.64 and 0.7 millimeters, and very shortly I'll show you how we go about actually setting that timing up, because it is critical. And then obviously all the other tuning is done. There are all sorts of screws and lock nuts and all sorts of things to actually that will actually affect the tune of this. The whole reason I'm going through this exercise is because, as you know from the initial series that I did, I bought a cheap, nasty injector pump, was told all sorts of things about it, and then the guy I bought it off, who says he rebuilt it within an inch of its life, has disappeared. I have not been able to find him ever since. So I've been left with no choice but to go with a new pump. So all up, I thought I was saving money by buying a pump for $1,200. It's actually cost me that $1,200 because these pumps are about $3,000, and at least I'm not paying for the labour, which, as you can see, it is a fairly labour intensive process. So everything's disconnected from the pump. I've pulled the timing cover off, got the nut off the shaft from the fuel pump. So now all I'm left with are 3 nuts holding the pump onto the block. There's 3 studs that come out, 2 on top and then 1 from underneath. And you undo those nuts and the pump should be able to slide back and out of the way, and then we can get cracking on getting the new one in. This is the gear that goes on the front of the pump. You'll see it's key weight, so it can only go on that shaft one way. But what's critical is there are actually 2 Zs stamped into the gear here, and there's a single Z stamped onto the gear that runs off the crankshaft. It's absolutely critical. The Z, the tooth that's actually marked with the Z, fits perfectly between these 2 Zs. You'll also find this gear has a J stamped into it. I don't know what that's for. All I know is we don't want to be using that as the timing mark. Alrighty, so we've got the pump in, and we've now got to start timing it up to make sure that the injectors are firing at the right time. So I've actually bought this handy dandy little gadget off eBay. It's a rotary injector pump timing tool. I think that was the search I did for it. Cost me about 80 bucks. So it's not the most expensive tool you're gonna buy. Basically the way it works, this end gets screwed into the back of the pump, and then you use the dial gauge to actually time it in. So you can see as you turn the engine over and the plunger in the back of the pump moves in and out, you can actually see the needle on the gauge will move around. Now it won't move around that much because there isn't that much movement in the plunger, but it is enough to get that incremental measurement that we're looking for. So to time the pump up, there's a bit of a process you need to follow. So we've got a handy dandy tool. First thing you've got to do is remove, there's a 12mm bolt in the center of the back of the pump. So you've got to pull that out along with the copper washer that's in there as well. Now if you're doing this all off the truck, if your engine's out of your vehicle, it's really easy to do. Otherwise you take your big fat hands and you do the best you can with the little bit you've got. So first thing we do is insert the tool in. We've found top dead center of the compression stroke, and we know that because we've got that little bit of movement in both the rockers for the valves. If it was on the exhaust stroke, then that exhaust valve would be fully open. So insert the tool, don't worry too much about where your dial gauge is sitting at this stage, because the next thing we do is actually crank the engine backwards. So your engine will normally rotate clockwise, so we just rotate it back in the anti-clockwise direction until such time as that dial gauge stops moving, which tells us that the plunger that's in there has reached the bottom of its travel. From there, we now zero the gauge. So bring the face of the gauge around to the 0 point, and then we bring the engine back to top dead center. So rotate it clockwise and we get to top dead center, and that will show you where the pump is currently timed to. one thing I should mention is you really want to have the pump cinched up at least so that it doesn't move whilst you're cranking the engine. So we know where the engine is currently timed to, or where the pump is currently timed to. So now we can crack off the nuts that are holding it, and then we can move the pump until that dial gauge is showing that the pump is timed to within the range that we want. Now on this pump it was between 0.64 and 0.7 mil. I've tried to get it right as close to the 0.7 as I possibly can. So once you've rotated the pump there, you can cinch up those nuts again. So I only had it cinched up on the two at the top because they're really easy to get to. And then got the pump timed, did up those two top bolts, then I got underneath the truck to do up that last one. And that is basically it. That's the timing for you. So now that you've got your timing all done under normal circumstances, if you're doing this in the vehicle, you'll attach all your injector lines back on, put your fuel hoses on, do your reassembly, and effectively you should be able to prime all your lines, turn the key, and fire it up. But because this is part of a number of upgrades, maintenance issues that I'm taking care of in one hit, I'm not going to do that because I'm actually going to start pulling the head off. If you've got any questions about any of this, feel free, write it down in the comments. Always happy to help out. If you think I've done something incorrectly, feel free to let me know. I will probably discover it as I go along. But again, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch what I do. If you're interested, I'll put up a link to the playlist for the actual engine swap, because if you are unaware, this vehicle actually started its life as a ZD30 truck and it's now running a TD42. And yeah, please hit the subscribe button, the like button, share it with your friends. It don't cost you anything. And we'll see you next time on Harry's Big Shed.